Hi everyone, in this video I am going to do two different things. The first part of the video will be the standard swatch and up close review and look at the new Naked Reloaded palette by Urban Decay. So we will take a close look at the palette, I'll show you the packaging, the details, the pricing, the shades, and I will do real-time swatches for you. But I know that a lot of people will be doing that on YouTube, and I wanted to kind of give you a look back at the original palette, and I will also be doing a comparison. I will swatch the original palette for you so that you can just see in real time how the swatches go on the skin compared to the Reloaded palette. And I'm also going to do a comparison for you for the purpose of helping you decide whether you really should spend the extra money on getting the Reloaded palette if you already have the original. So whether or not you're interested in just the swatches of the new Reloaded palette, or whether you're really on the fence and you have the original Naked palette and are not sure if the Reloaded palette is really worth getting it on top of your original Naked palette, stay tuned. Remember to subscribe to the channel and hit that red subscribe button if you aren't already a subscriber. Also make sure to follow Allura Beauty on Instagram. The handle is in the description box below so that you can be eligible for the upcoming giveaway. Last, make sure you sign up through Ebates. The link for that will also be in the description box so that you can get cash back on any online purchase that you make. Make sure to stay tuned because swatches for NARS's newest cheek palette as well as the new lip products are going to be swatched and reviewed for you. And I'm going to do a skincare comparison video comparing the new Good Molecules line that's supposed to be like a better version, cheaper version of the Ordinary skincare line. I have a lot of thoughts that I want to share with you and that I think will be important for you to consider before you spend your money on one brand or the other. All right, let's get to swatching and comparing Urban Decay's new Naked Reloaded palette. So this palette is available through Urban Decay at the moment. It just launched. It retails for $44 and it will be launched soon on sites like Sephora and Ulta. So this is basically the reincarnation of the original Naked palette. It features 12 all new eyeshadow shades to redefine neutral with Urban Decay's signature formula. So this is what the palette looks like. The packaging is very interesting. It's made of this material and it is slightly squishy on the top. It opens with a magnetic closure, and of course the name of the palette is in gold on the top. It is quite thin and sleek, and when you open it up, you do get a generously sized mirror in the top, and these are the shadows that you get. Now, as you can see, the pans in this palette are sized differently. Urban Decay has made the 4 outer pans in the palette bigger for the shades that they think that you will use most. And the finishes of all 12 shades range from silky mattes and metallics to iridescent micro shimmers. They are all supposed to have a velvety texture, rich color, and extreme blendability. So here's a look at the palette up close. I do really like the details in this palette, from the kind of squishy material packaging on the outside to the details in the inside of the palette. Here you go looking at the shades up close. Each name of each shade is there on the palette itself underneath the corresponding pan. And as usual, I will be swatching these left to right as they appear in the pan with an eyeshadow brush, and I will also do the swatches over an eyeshadow primer. So we start with Bribe, which they say is a matte warm ivory. This definitely has shimmer in it, so I'm not sure why it's labeled as being matte. Next is Barely Baked, which is a soft metallic gold. Angel Fire is a pale rose gold with iridescent micro glitter. I'm gonna add more product to that swatch. It was pretty sheer and builds up really nicely. Retro is a bright matte peach. Reputation is a deep rose gold with iridescent micro shimmer. Burn is a metallic copper burgundy. Endgame is a matte chocolate brown. Dreamweaver is a cool brown with 3D iridescent glitter. Definitely didn't swatch well with one layer. Let's see if we can build up to two. And then on a couple of these, in just a bit, I'll probably show you swatches with a damp brush application. Distilled is a metallic bronze. Bucked is a matte warm brown. Boundaries is a matte warm terracotta. And Blur is a matte light nude. Okay, so here you go with just a regular dry brush application. Most of these go on very easily and smoothly with good color. You do have to layer some of these, but I think once you put it on the lid, that kind of thing is not as noticeable. Okay, let's try a couple of colors with damp brush application, and I'm gonna swatch them with my finger also. So let's start with Angel Fire. That was the third one we swatched. It's still very sheer on the skin. I think that's how it's intended. Definitely glides much easier with a damp brush. I went in again, still with a damp brush to layer. And let's compare that with finger swatch, yeah, it's much more straightforward. This looks a little more champagne-y, and the damp application brings out more of the pink shimmer. You can't tell right now. Hopefully when I bring this up close, you'll be able to see a difference. And then here is Dreamweaver, which was the other shade that really didn't swatch well with a dry brush. Still not the greatest with a damp brush, but let's add another layer here. Just looks a little patchy, even with a tapping application. And then let's try with finger application. Wow, I'm surprised. It's still pretty streaky and patchy. Okay, here are those two shades with kind of different applications. Start with Dreamweaver. And then Angel Fire. Okay, so let me give you my thoughts on the Reloaded palette itself before we do any sort of comparison. I think this is very on par with the other Naked palettes that Urban Decay has released. Overall, the quality is very nice. You have 1 to 2 kind of more difficult shades to work with, but that's also true with the other Naked palettes. So I don't think that's any decrease overall in quality compared to the other Naked palettes that exist. So if you don't own any of the other Naked palettes and you like these colors that are in the Reloaded palette, I definitely don't think that you are making a bad investment by purchasing this palette. Let's go ahead. I'm going to swatch the Reloaded palette with shorter swatches so that underneath them we can go ahead and look at the original Naked palette in comparison. So here's the original Naked palette. I think it's interesting how they kept the kind of material packaging, carried that over into the Reloaded palette. I don't know if that's intentional. I would assume it is. They kept the gold lettering, and this one had more of a felt feel to it. This one has a smoother texture to it, but they kept the same kind of, you know, in the ballpark or family of materials. And if you know anything about the other Naked palettes, you know that they have slightly different packaging, but they are mostly metal/plastic. So in terms of comparing the palettes, the Reloaded one is definitely slimmer, not only this way, but also in terms of the sizing this way. This might be a better way to compare them. So it is more sleek, and here's the original. Obviously you can tell that I have used this a lot throughout the years. So this is what the original packaging looked like inside. It also contained a mirror, although slightly smaller, whereas the Reloaded mirror extends the entire length of the palette. The nice thing about the original was that it included this well where you got a double-sided eyeliner, and of course in some of the other Naked palettes they included a brush, whereas in the new palette it is more sleek and small, but part of that is you don't get a brush or an eyeliner in the palette itself. And despite that, these are both the same price. The original Naked palette was $44 and the Reloaded one is $44. Obviously, one of the other major differences is that all the palette sizes were the same, or pan sizes were the same in the original, and the pan sizes in the Reloaded palette are differently sized as you go from the outer colors to the ones in the middle. So I've gone ahead and swatched the Reloaded palette on top and the original Naked palette on bottom. I wanted to note that what I was noticing when I was looking at these palettes again is the Reloaded palette goes from roughly lighter from the outside to the deepest shade on the center, in the center, whereas the traditional palette, like the original palette, goes from lightest to darkest. So I reorganized the swatches on here to make it a little easier to compare. So I went from the outside left to right. So I went to this color, then to Blur, then to Barely Naked, then to Boundaries, etc., back and forth till I got to the center shade. So here are the colors, and hopefully you can see the textures too. I mean, you can see that they have the very similar vibe when it comes to being nude neutral palettes. Virgin from the original palette and Bribe are very similar, with Bribe just being a little more pale. And you have, you know, some similarities with the other shades too, especially these kinds of neutrals in this family here. Nothing that is too really dead on, other than I would say the first lightest shades, and then maybe these neutral shades here. But, you know, when I'm swatching the Naked palette, I also notice, you know, kind of some shades needing more layering than others. For example, this Hustle shade here really does not swatch very well and looks pretty patchy on the skin. Sidecar is also a shade that surprisingly swatches pretty well. I think swatches may be better than it applies, if nothing else but because it creates so much fallout when you apply, even when you apply it damp or with your finger. And then you can see Buck here, which is this shade, is similar to Bucked from the Reloaded palette, although in the Reloaded palette, Bucked is more warm toned, whereas in the Naked palette, the shade is more cool toned or neutral toned. And last kind of overlap that I notice is with the original, you kind of have this slight outlier with this more blue toned steel shade, and the kind of pop of color in the Reloaded palette is this more coral or peachy shade. So at the end of the day, do I really think that you'll find something super unique or get a lot of payoff with also picking up the Reloaded palette if you already have a good amount of product left in your original? I don't think so. I mean, you're getting a lot of these standard, typical overlapping shades. I think the only real distinct difference is obviously if you want this pop of coral, but you're probably not gonna pay $44 for a whole new palette just to get a pop of peach like that. But you also have some more warm toned, shimmering, brown shades in the Reloaded palette, whereas the original Naked palette is actually comparatively a little more neutral / cool toned when you put it side by side to the Reloaded palette. The Reloaded palette is actually a lot more warm toned relative to the original Naked palette. All right, I hope that you enjoyed that video, and I also really hope that having that comparison for some more long-term Urban Decay clients who have the original Naked palette, hopefully that comparison gave you some sort of insight, or at the very least was interesting to you. Please give the video a thumbs up if you liked it. Leave me a comment in the comment section below. Are you going to buy the Naked Reloaded palette? Are you going to buy it and already have the original Naked palette, or did you never own the original Naked palette? it, or are you going to pass on everything, or pass on it because you already have the original and you're content with that? Let me know in the comment section below, or any other thoughts in terms of interesting comparisons, overlaps, or differences that you think are important for people to know about. Thank you so much for taking the time to watch, and I'll see you in the next video.